Hi everyone, and welcome to National Careers Week. Today we're joined by Joe Robinson, who is PPC Lead at Be Found, Be Chosen. So Joe's going to tell us a little bit about his role within marketing and kind of the pathway into his career. So thank you very much for joining, Joe. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having us. All good. Yeah, managed to get a bit of time out of my day to come and do this anyway, which is it's a bit of a change of pace, so I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, amazing. We really appreciate you joining. So first of all, are you all right just to tell us a little bit about your role at the minute?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think first and foremost, when you're talking about that, it's good to know I work at a marketing agency. So rather than working for kind of any one company and working internally on their marketing, we as an agency have got kind of 30 or 40 clients where we'll handle bits of their marketing, but not all of it kind of as a team. And within that, my job is to basically make sure that the paid ads that those guys are running, so whether that's the kind that you see on Google or Facebook or whatever, anything that's kind of digital in that sense, is being run the best that it can be, you know. So if you imagine at the start of 2020, when everyone sort of got locked down and was staying in the house and so on, and all of your shopping was being done online, we had, you know, kind of 30 small businesses, and their biggest question for us was kind of how do we get all these people who are shopping online to take the time and come and buy from us instead of from, you know, Amazon or other known names like that. And so I've got, you know, kind of 10 or 15 of my own clients within that. And then as far as the wider service and, you know, the work that I deliver, but for everybody's clients, how can we make sure that that's getting better and is the best that it can be, really?
Oh, that's really interesting. I think it's a funny one, isn't it? Because although you see all these ads all the time, you never really think about how they've got there, do you? And sometimes you think, oh, that's such a coincidence. But it's not really, is it?
No, yeah, I think people go to the extreme sometimes and sort of think that your phone's sort of a little device in your pocket that's sitting listening to you, which the jury's out on, absolutely. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think it's as extreme as that. But definitely the sort of they know what websites you've been on and the sort of things you've already been shopping for. And you know, it's no coincidence that you do a couple of searches for, you know, a new outfit or whatever, and then suddenly kind of ASOS is knocking down your door every time you open Instagram. That much is, yeah, kind of quite on purpose. And it's my job to make sure that it's done properly. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So it's funny to think about actually, because I guess the purpose of the podcast is to think about how you got in your role, and for any students who are currently sitting thinking that they want to go into marketing. And I think when you were like back in year 11, the idea of what marketing was is probably very different to what it is now. So did you always know that you wanted to go into to marketing?
I think not even close. No. Marketing is one of those industries where not necessarily for bad reasons, but people seem to sort of fall into it more often than they aspire to it. Certainly, you know, I look around at the people that I work with, and there's, you know, everything from people who've studied, you know, different branches of science or sports, people who've gone off and done art, and then sort of end up in marketing one way or another. And it's quite diverse in that sense. So for me personally, no, definitely not. And yeah, I've had a few different ideas before I've done this and ended up really enjoying it.
Oh, amazing. So what sort of thing did you want to do when you were back in year 11?
I think if we go back to year 11, I wanted to do something in science, you know. My A levels were in sort of different sciences, and then I studied maths as well. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do like beyond that, but I knew I wanted to go to university and study some kind of science. And then even by the end of sort of year 12, that changed, and I wanted to study maths instead. So I went and did that, and that seemed like a safe choice because it doesn't close many doors. You know, it's not like you rule yourself out of too many things by doing that. And then I ended up doing a couple of different jobs over the years, and ended up coming into the kind of marketing that I do, being fairly numbers heavy. And the company that I went and worked for at first was actually looking for a maths graduate who could sort of like get a lot of this data that's behind the scenes and, you know, crunch it in a spreadsheet and kind of get the value out of it. Whereas now I don't necessarily do as much of that as I used to. And it is that more sort of deliberate marketing in terms of, you know, deciding what to say and who to say it to more than just crunching numbers. So the maths definitely sort of was a factor at first, but realistically, I think I had a lot of other ideas. And then I just sort of, by just doing things that I enjoyed, really, I ended up here kind of by accident and stayed out of choice.
Oh, that's really interesting, because I think if you imagined that you wanted to go and study maths, it wouldn't immediately think that you would go into marketing, would it? But then as you described that there, it was quite a natural transition, I guess, from where you were to the role that you're in now.
Definitely, yeah. I think if you look at the stuff that I've done for, you know, I'm 28 now, so it's 10 years since I went to university. If you look at what I've done over those 10 years, it's been kind of quite different things for sort of 2 or 3 years at a time. But then once I got into marketing, it kind of neatly tied all the other stuff together into sort of one set of skills, really. So I guess someone that was already in marketing might have seen it coming, but for me, it was a total surprise. But it all made sense once it happened.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. That's good to hear. So what does kind of a typical day look like for you at work?
It's There's only so much structure to a day like mine, which is nice, to be honest. It keeps it fresh. It means that you're never getting too kind of into the routine to the point where it gets boring.
Yeah.
But I'd say within that, there's still kind of a fairly clear set of things that you want to do in a given day, because obviously when we're running these ads, we're paying for them every time someone clicks on an ad. You're spending a few pence up to a few pounds or even more, depending on what industry it's in. The first thing we do when we get in on a morning is look at everything that we've done, not necessarily just yesterday, but certainly up until midnight last night, and just make sure that it's all still kind of working the way that it should do. Because you've got information on how much money you've spent, and how many sales that led to, and so on, and everything in between within that journey. And yeah, sometimes you will come in and someone's credit card bill at their company hasn't been paid, so their ads have stopped running or something like that, and you have to kind of jump on that quite quickly. But even in a day where it's fairly normal, you want to have a look and think, well, someone made a lot of money yesterday. Why is that? What can we go and sort of learn from that? And then once you've sort of checked things over, it's just that idea that a lot of what we do is starting out with that basic look at, this is what someone wants to sell and who they want to sell it to. But the part where they come and pay us, a fee every month, is that we find ways to do that better every time and kind of keep it fresh. Obviously, you said there yourself that a lot of these ads, we don't really think about where they're coming from. At the same time, if you saw the same ones all the time, you'd probably just tune them out and stop seeing them. It's the same as with anything. So we've got to kind of make sure that it's doing what we want it to do sales wise, but also make sure that we're kind of varying it and keeping it fresh and responding to anything that's going on within the industry, or just the wider world. I've got a few clients that sell sort of gifting products, whether it's jewelry and things like that. Those guys have all just had big events on for Valentine's Day and things like that. So we've wound those down now. We're looking at how it went, and now we're starting to think about whether it's Mother's Day or Easter or whatever. And so there's always kind of the next thing to think about, but then there's also just the day-to-day of making sure that it's all going okay as well. So it's interesting, and there is sort of enough of a routine there that you can get good at it, but it's also never going to get stale on you either.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing, isn't it? That it is probably changing all the time. And like you say, there's like different seasons are leading up to different events and different occasions that you're like planning for. It keeps it fresh each day, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got, obviously, depending on a client as well, it's going to be different for one person than another. But then you've also got the stuff like, Black Friday to Christmas is, if you work in the work that we do, then Black Friday is basically the closest you're going to get to the Super Bowl, really. And you've got to really be, thinking about that well in advance. So things like that kind of make it quite interesting as well.
Yeah, definitely. Are you able to give us like any examples of like clients that you're working with or have worked with in the past that you've maybe seen like a big improvement in, or anyone that's just been quite interesting?
I think in terms of the ones that we found really really enjoyable to work on, is we've worked with some household names, kind of like Ramsden's, the jewelers. We've worked with those guys, a couple of the sort of local colleges and things like that. We've even done some work for anyone, not necessarily obviously trying to sell things, but to make sure that whatever events those guys are running and stuff, just make sure that people know they're happening, so they go and get involved with them. But I think the more enjoyable ones are some of the smaller retailers, where we've worked with a couple of the kind of clothing retailers and department stores up in like the north side of Northumberland. The lockdowns happened sort of at the end of 2020, when things were starting to get a little bit more serious again towards Christmas. And we just taken on a client who just ran this small store in Alnwick, really, and was suddenly very worried, because they were kind of getting into Christmas, and it was turning out now that their shop was going to be shut for 4 weeks. They were going to be obviously not making any money in that time. They weren't going to be selling to customers or anything like that. And so what we basically did is kind of took all of their products, everything they sold, and effectively over 2 or 3 days got it all online. And so when people were looking to buy this stuff, because everyone overnight was starting to do their Christmas shopping through the internet now, and without a choice in the matter, we were making sure that these guys were where people were looking, and that was kind of the first time for them. And so they used to kind of people walking in who are quite loyal customers from Alnwick or as far as Morpeth or whatever. But then all of a sudden you have people in sort of Glasgow and London and, you know, parts of Northern Ireland and things like that were buying from this store now. And they went from being, you know, really quite worried about how they were going to get through December because it had already been quite a tough year for them, to suddenly being quite excited about this, you know. And even once the store opened back up again, it was our job to make sure that, yeah, they could keep that sort of bigger reach. And even though people had sort of more choice in what they were going to do, we could make sure that, yeah, they could reach these people that were further out and have that sort of that larger set of sales that they had as well. And, you know, I think it's as much as it's nice to say you've worked with some of the really bigger sort of high street names, it's the little guys where you've sort of taken someone's livelihood really and helped them to grow that or to maintain it or whatever. That's probably the more satisfying ones, I think.
Oh, definitely. I bet that was so nice. So I think, like you say, someone was obviously so concerned, and I think all the like local businesses were so concerned at the start of the pandemic, but actually their like shop has probably gone further than they'd ever even imagined it would, which is amazing for them, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It was especially nice in that example I've just given, where it was sort of October, November where it happened, because we had a couple of people come to us and they were sort of really worried in March, you know, when everything very first started, and we'd been able to make that work for them. So then somebody else kind of was a little bit worried in October, and we were able to sort of really confidently say, like, no, we've got this. This is fine. We've done this 5 or 6 times now. Like, you're going to be okay. And it was nice to just kind of be that reassurance for them.
Oh, definitely. I think that's again like another area of it that you probably don't like, it doesn't initially come to your mind when you think of marketing, but actually it is able to like transform people's businesses, isn't it? And yeah, I think it's amazing what you can actually do now with things. So you've probably just answered the question there, but I was going to ask, what do you find most enjoyable about your job?
I think for me, yeah, it's the part where you know that you've gotten a good result for somebody, and that's always satisfying, kind of whichever client it is. But especially when you've got, yeah, a smaller business where, you know, a lot of them these days, you know, are worried if they're selling online about being able to compete with, you know, the Amazons of the world. And at first it was just them, but now you've got kind of the really big names in terms of, you know, the supermarkets and John Lewis, and, you know, if it's electronics, then you've got the guys that are like Currys and things like that. They've kind of gotten wise to it now, and so the thing that we are able to come in and do is make sure that if you are just running, you know, a small store in a small town, or you're an online only business that people haven't necessarily heard of, we're able to say that, you know, we can help you to still compete within that market. And it's making a difference for the smaller people that I think I enjoy the most. You know, you talk about marketing or advertising and people think about, you know, they think about the Coca-Cola advert at Christmas where it's sort of, you know, Santa in a wagon and all the rest of it. But actually there's, yeah, right down to the smallest businesses these days, everybody's doing something, and it's having a hand in that I think is much more satisfying in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then with that, then what would you say is like the biggest challenges or anything that you find difficult within your role?
I think it's the other side of the same coin, really. You know, there are always going to be times where it is a quiet week or a quiet month, and when those times come around, you know, someone is trusting us to help them to get through that and to recover from it. And so, as much as it's a really enjoyable thing when it's going right, we're also the people that kind of get asked the more difficult questions when it goes wrong. You know, and even, you know, you can run an account for months and years without, you know, making anything that you'd call kind of a big mistake or anything like that. But sometimes, you know, if you imagine the second or the third week of January, nobody's been paid for 4 or 5 weeks, like it is quiet. And it's being able to still kind of look across, even if it's just all of the clients that you've got, and say, listen, you know, it's not just you, everyone's in the same boat, like it's a bit quiet now, it will pick up again. And sort of being reassuring in that way. But yeah, while you're doing it, it can be sort of one of the more challenging parts of the job. And then I think as well, there's just that sort of that wider thing that if you speak to anybody that's in a marketing agency, really, because you've got, you know, 30 or 35 clients that you're looking at, there's a lot of scope for somebody somewhere to have, you know, something that they needed to respond to quite now. And it can be quite a fast paced thing. And, you know, you can be busy for sort of longer times. You know, I've waited sort of 3-4 days to hear back from one of my friends who works at an agency just because they've been busy with something. But I think at the same time, you know, the days of that being like chaos are over and done with. And these days the work-life balance is quite good, but sometimes in the moment you still are expected to sort of perform at quite short notice.
Yeah, and I think it's the same in most jobs, isn't it? To be honest, there's always times that are busier than the others, and you have to just kind of accept it and plod on, don't you? I guess like you were saying, the good probably outweighs the bad, I guess. So although sometimes it's difficult and there's only so much you can do in terms of putting out the best ads possible or whatever it might be, there is only so much you can do. And I guess a big part of your job probably is like the reassuring the clients, isn't it? That actually things are going to be okay, they are going to pick up again. And whether that is putting a few more hours in on your end, I guess it works out, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely it. I think sometimes especially in January, we had it at the start of this month now when we're sort of recording this, that we did have to go to quite a few people and just say, yeah, like, look, from the 1st till the 31st, it was not such a good month, and here's why we're going to be okay with that, and here's why it's all right. And it's like you say, yeah, there's always going to be parts where you have to sort of, yeah, just plod on and do it. And I think one of the bigger mistakes that it's easy to make at the very start of your career and looking for a job and things is wanting that job where you're going to go in at 9 o'clock on Monday and until 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock on Friday or whatever it is, you're going to want to love like every single second of it. And a lot of the time, yeah, like those jobs just kind of aren't there. There's always the bit that you're going to get frustrated by, or that's not as interesting, a bit tedious compared to the rest of them. But if you can get a good sort of 25-30 hours where you really enjoy what you do, then the rest of it, you just sort of think, well, you can't have one without the other. So I'm happy to do it.
Definitely. And I guess I don't know if it's the same where you work, but I think within marketing sometimes there's some nice perks, or whether it is that you get away early some days, or whether you're going to nice events or something. I guess that kind of outweighs the difficult times as well. I don't know, is there much of that like in your company?
Definitely, yeah. I think in terms of flexibility and freedom, things like that, there's a lot to be said across the whole marketing industry, but certainly at the company that I'm at as well. I know that there's a lot in the news right now about people jumping onto a 4-day week and things like that. A lot of the companies that I'm seeing, at least, obviously there's probably a bit of bias again with LinkedIn or Facebook or whoever shows me more stuff about marketers, because they know I'm more likely to be interested. But a lot of these agencies are starting to do it, and there's plenty of times where if I know that I'm finished on Friday at 2 o'clock and there's no emergencies, then it's in my contract. I can go home at 2 o'clock on a Friday if I want to, and even then you can work from anywhere. There's been days where I've not fancied going into the office, so I've gone into the city centre and I've sat in a coffee shop or whatever, and I've been able to just work from there anyway. And then, like you say, there's plenty of things with clients, with awards shows, and sometimes if a client's extra thankful, to sort of send you something anyway. There's a perfume brand that I've done some work with in 2021, and they sent much more than I was ever expecting through, just to thank them for all the work that we'd done and all the sort of the growth that we've been able to get them. And that was kind of like a genuine sort of gift that you wouldn't necessarily get that from certain other places. So there's a lot of perks and things where even on the difficult days you can normally find a way to make your job a little bit nicer to do. And then also, yeah, there's the thanks and the payoff at the end is always quite easy to see.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that sounds really nice. All right, well, that's been really useful to hear like a little bit more about kind of different roles within marketing. And hopefully it's been really helpful for some of the students listening. Just before we kind of wrap it up, do you have any advice that you would give to any students who are considering going into a career in marketing?
Yeah, I think the big thing to be aware of at the moment, is obviously, if you talked about marketing 10 years ago, you'd be thinking about whether you meant sort of the offline kind or the online digital kind. But certainly since kind of the middle of 2020, the digital side is the bigger piece of the pie, and it's all the digital focused stuff, or at least your job's always going to have a bit of that in most cases. And what's interesting on that side of it is that it's all change. So much like you were saying at the start of this conversation, the stuff that I was thinking about 10 years ago, even if it had been marketing, would have been completely different from what's being done now. Any role that you go into is likely to be a change in role, not in a negative way. It can be a really exciting, interesting thing. But I think just the idea that it is all change, and there's a lot of this that's going to be, something where if you know what's coming and you can kind of react to it earlier than other people, then that can be a really, really positive thing for you. So marketing is something where I would say you get into the role and then you're going to have to pick up certain things and learn stuff anyway. If you're able to kind of see where things are going and how they're changing and look to sort of learn that as well, then you can do really well just by being sort of ahead of these advancements, really. And in that sense, don't be afraid to try a lot of different things as well. It's all different and it's all change. And there aren't many people who are gonna see that you've done something for 6 months or 12 months at the start of your career. So then they won't let you try something different after 2 years or whatever. Like a lot of people do chop and change. So if it's something you want to go into, then, absolutely do that and give it a look, just because a lot of us kind of end up here without expecting it doesn't mean you can't plan it. But also, still try new things when you're in the industry, because you might be surprised by the part of it that you end up really enjoying.
Oh, I think that's really good advice. I think like you were saying at the start, Joe, you're 28 now and you've been in a few different roles before you even ended up kind of within marketing. And I think that's something that we always try and put across to students, that I think some of our parents or grandparents stayed in jobs for literally their whole lives until they're retired, and that was their one sole kind of career. Whereas I think now in our generation, it's like very common to start somewhere and end up somewhere completely different. And whether you do that in the space of 5 years or 20 years, it's like you say, just putting yourself out there to actually accept that change and try something new. And I definitely agree. I think with marketing, it is one of those things where you've started on a completely different career pathway and ended up in marketing, but actually some students know that that's what they want to do, and it's fine to kind of go straight into that if that's what you know and that's what you want to try first of all. So yeah, I think that's some really good advice. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks for chatting with us. Yeah, it's been really interesting.
Well, I think you've given some really good advice and really good background in marketing. I know I've learned bits today as well, which has been really good. So thank you so much for coming on and chatting to us today. We'll let you get back to work.
Yeah, that's no problem. I hope the rest of the week goes really well.